Thank you for joining me today. I speak to you not just as a voice behind a screen, but as someone deeply moved by the weight of what we've witnessed. My heart, like many of yours, carries the heaviness of loss and the cautious hope that follows the silence of war. I come before you not with easy answers, but with a message, one rooted in truth, in faith, and in the unwavering belief that even in our darkest moments, there is a path forward. Peace is not the absence of war, but the triumph of hope over hostility. This phrase speaks to a truth that many overlook when thinking about what it really means to live in peace. Too often, we imagine peace as a quiet room, a calm sea, a life uninterrupted by violence or disruption. But real peace, the kind that transforms lives and nations, is so much more than just the silence that follows the guns. It is the persistent and powerful decision to hope when there seems to be no reason left to hope. It is the steady choice to believe in reconciliation even when the wounds are fresh and the pain is still echoing. Peace that comes merely from stopping war is temporary, fragile, and easily shattered. Ceasefires can be broken. Agreements can be tossed aside. But the peace that grows from hope, the hope that people can change, that enemies can become neighbors, that forgiveness is possible, is a peace that has the power to endure. This peace isn't handed down by governments alone. It doesn't rely solely on diplomacy or treaties. It begins in the heart. It begins when a mother decides not to raise her child to hate. When a soldier lays down his weapon, not because the war is over, but because he sees something better worth fighting for peace itself. Hope is what keeps people moving forward after the destruction of war. It's what fuels the rebuilding of homes, schools, and communities. Hope tells the grieving that their loved ones did not die in vain. Hope breathes into the ashes of what was and dares to imagine what could be. It is not naive, it is bold. To hope in the face of hostility is not weakness, it is strength, because hostility wants to spread. It wants to grow, to consume, to infect every part of a society. But hope resists. Hope plants its feet and says, not here, not anymore. When we talk about nations like Israel and Iran reaching a ceasefire, we should not look only at the paper that was signed or the diplomatic statements issued. We should look into the hearts of the people, those who lost, those who suffered, those who now must live with the memories of what they've endured. And we should ask, is there still hope in them? If there is, then peace has a chance. Then this ceasefire can be more than a pause. It can be the beginning of something new. True peace is always a victory of hope. It is the triumph of believing that no matter how broken the past, the future can still be made whole. It's not about pretending the war didn't happen. It's about choosing not to let it define what happens next. When hostility fails to destroy our belief in each other's humanity, when it fails to silence the voices calling for unity, it loses. And hope wins. So yes, peace is not the absence of war. It is the courage to hope for something better, and to act upon that hope until hostility has no place left to stand. In the ashes of conflict, the seeds of healing and redemption can take root. This statement is not merely poetic. It is a profound truth that history has proven again and again. War leaves behind more than rubble. It leaves behind broken lives, shattered dreams, deep mistrust, and generations of grief. Yet strangely, it is often in the very places where destruction has occurred that the strongest movements of healing begin. Where there was once division and despair, something new and redemptive can grow, if people are willing to nurture it. Ashes are the remains of something that once burned brightly, something that was destroyed. They are symbolic of loss, but also of transformation. Fire consumes, but it also clears the ground. It strips away what was, sometimes painfully, to make room for what could be. In this sense, ashes do not mean the end of life. They can signify a painful beginning, a place where the soil has been broken open for change. Conflict has a way of exposing the deepest wounds in societies, families, and individuals. It shows what divides us, but it also reveals what we cannot afford to lose. In the aftermath, when the noise fades and the grief settles, people often find themselves longing not just for recovery, but for something more, something better than what was before. That longing becomes the soil for healing. When people begin to acknowledge each other's pain, when apologies are spoken and forgiveness begins to take shape, something powerful happens. Trust, however fragile, starts to grow again. That is the first sign of healing. But healing alone is not enough. True healing leads to redemption. Redemption means taking what was broken and bringing purpose from it. It's when victims become voices for peace, when former enemies stand together and say, "Never again." Redemption is not about forgetting the past. It's about transforming it. It's about taking the very things that were meant to destroy and using them as the foundation for rebuilding. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's hard work. It takes honesty, humility, and patience. It requires communities to come together, not just in mourning, but in shared resolve. It calls for leaders with vision and ordinary people with courage. The kind of healing and redemption that lasts must be cultivated. Seeds need tending. They need time. They need care, and they need to be protected from the lingering winds of hatred and revenge. Still, history tells us that such growth is possible. We've seen nations rise from ruins, friendships formed between once bitter enemies, and cultures that were once at war become beacons of unity. None of it came easily, but it all started with people who chose to believe that ashes were not the end of the story. So, in the aftermath of any conflict, no matter how long or how fierce, let us look closely at the ashes. Not to mourn what was lost alone, but to find what might still be planted. The seeds of healing and redemption are already there. We need only the courage to plant them, the faith to water them, and the hope to wait for them to grow. True strength lies not in how long we fight, but in how earnestly we pursue peace. This statement challenges the way we often define power and courage. For much of history, strength has been measured by a nation's ability to dominate, to endure war, to persist through pain, and to outlast its enemy. But real strength is not just about stamina in conflict. It is about the willingness to stop fighting when there is a higher purpose to be achieved. It is about recognizing that peace requires more bravery, more wisdom, and more discipline than war ever will. There is something deeply human about the impulse to fight when we are wronged or threatened. It's an instinct rooted in survival, in pride, in the drive to protect what is ours. But strength should never be confused with stubbornness. Fighting for the sake of fighting proves little except that we are unwilling to consider a better way. On the other hand, the pursuit of peace demands introspection. It requires us to lay down not only weapons, but also ego. And there is no armor heavier to shed than pride. Pursuing peace is not passive. It is not weakness. It is not the absence of struggle, but the redirection of struggle toward reconciliation. It means sitting across the table from those we once called enemies and choosing to listen instead of accuse. It means extending grace when we have every reason to withhold it. And it means working tirelessly not for revenge or retribution, but for understanding, healing, and restoration. That is the kind of strength that outlasts war. That is the kind of strength that builds civilizations, not just defends them. When we fight endlessly, we may win a battle, but we risk losing something more important, our humanity. Endless war hardens hearts. It breeds cycles of bitterness that pass from one generation to the next. Children learn to fear instead of trust. Societies become shaped more by what they are against than by what they stand for. But peace has the power to rewrite that story. When we pursue it earnestly, we choose to define ourselves by what we build, not what we destroy. This pursuit isn't easy. It often means absorbing pain instead of returning it. It means rising above insult and injury in the belief that justice and compassion can exist side by side. It means negotiating not only across borders, but across wounded hearts. It requires vision that looks beyond the present tensions to the promise of a future where children grow up unafraid and where dialogue replaces division. So let us not admire strength only in the soldiers who stand tall in battle, but also in the leaders who bend to seek peace. Let us honor not only the endurance of war, but the courage to end it, for it is one thing to fight long and hard. It is another thing entirely to recognize when peace is the greater prize, and to pursue it with all the strength we can give. That is where true power lies, not in how long we hold a sword, but in how boldly we choose to put it down. This ceasefire is not the end. It is the invitation to rebuild what hatred tried to destroy. When war ends, it may seem like the final page of a long and painful chapter, but in truth, it marks the beginning of something far more important. The ceasefire signals not only the silencing of weapons, but the call to action, an opportunity to restore, to heal, and to remake what has been torn apart. The battle may have paused, but the real work has just begun. Hatred is a force that does more than wound bodies. It fractures trust, dismantles communities, and poisons generations. In war, hatred fuels destruction. It tears down homes, burns bridges between neighbors, and reshapes cities into graveyards. Yet, even in its most violent forms, hatred can never fully erase the human spirit. It can shatter buildings, but it cannot erase the longing for peace, the desire for dignity, or the yearning to live without fear. That longing survives, and with the first breath of a ceasefire, that longing begins to take form, an invitation to rebuild not just walls, but relationships, dreams, and futures. To rebuild after war is to choose creation over destruction. It is to look upon what remains and ask what can still be made new. Roads must be repaired, schools reopened, lives pieced back together. But beyond that, the harder work begins, rebuilding trust where suspicion has taken root, extending forgiveness where pain still lingers, and seeking justice without reigniting vengeance. This rebuilding is not the task of governments alone. It is the responsibility of people, one choice at a time, one act of grace at a time. It will not be easy. Rebuilding what hatred tried to destroy means standing where grief still lives. It means acknowledging loss without letting it define the future. It means holding space for sorrow and still planting seeds of hope. The foundations may be cracked, but they are not beyond repair. The silence after war is fragile, but within it lies the chance to craft something that even hatred cannot undo. Unity born not of similarity, but of shared determination to move forward. This invitation is sacred. It calls not for perfection, but for persistence. For the willingness to show up day after day, to mend what was broken, to love what remains, and to believe that peace is not just possible, it is necessary. The future will be shaped by those who rise from the ruins and decide that violence will no longer have the final word. We must remember that hatred tried to destroy not only lives, but hope. It tried to steal the future by chaining it to the past. But the ceasefire declares that hatred has failed. It did not win. It could not erase the human will to survive, to forgive, and to begin again. So now, in the quiet after the storm, the invitation stands. Rebuild, rebuild with compassion, rebuild with wisdom. Rebuild with love that hatred could not destroy. This is not the end. It is the beginning of a better way.